Lesson 2, mastering getting on podcasts. In 2020, I booked the Bonjoro CEO, CMO, and myself on nearly 200 podcasts. These podcasts became our company's central growth lever, pushing us to over 40,000 users. In November 2020 alone, I booked 43 podcasts, many in the top 5% of all podcasts in the world. I did the bookings part-time, a few hours a week. Most podcast booking agencies, if you look online, will charge $250 to $500 a podcast and will only book up to 3 to 4 podcasts a month. Most of the agencies will not be able to get you on anything ranked in the top 5% of podcasts. So instead of $0, what we spent, just my time, 200 podcasts would have run us about $100,000. In this lesson, I will show you exactly how I did it. Step 1, get started on Listen Notes. Listen Notes is a database of 1,818,788 podcasts that ended up being one of my secret weapons. Before Listen Notes, I had to use Apple Podcasts, plus email sleuthing, plus LinkedIn, and even then the pitches were very hit or miss. It was also highly time intensive. Listen Notes has a few key advantages. They give you contact emails for 90% of the podcasts. This is a huge and likely the biggest differentiator for the platform. They have a ranking system that shows you if a podcast is top 25%, top 10%, top 5%, etc. So you can invest your time in only the best opportunities. You can use filters to only look at podcasts still actively producing episodes, filter by language or other criteria like that. It saves you a ton of time. Listen Notes used to be a free service, but they now charge a small daily fee. At first glance, I know that seems weird. Who charges a daily fee? But it's $4 to $8 a day, and it auto cancels after 2 days unless you want to add more days in. I often would batch it, so get 2 days here and there, and try to do as much work as I could during those periods. The fact that it is paid is actually a good thing. From hosts I chat with and from my connection rate data, I have found podcasts are way more receptive to pitches now because they get a few a day instead of 50 plus a day, which they got when it was free. I would happily pay $140, which is what I spent to date over the course of that year, to get 200 booked podcasts. When you search for a topic, the bar on the right-hand side that says Super Search Off is where you want to click to get your premium membership started. I'm going to walk you through in this video how to get started with Listen Notes. So Listen Notes is the largest podcast engine in the world that is going to give you key pieces of data like email address that is going to allow you to be successful with this strategy. So step 1, go to listennotes.com. As you see right here, it's going to take you to this page. And then start by just typing in, for example, a subject like, let's just say, B2B marketing to open this up. So I'll search that, and what you guys are going to need to do to be able to kind of get maximum leverage out of this is to go ahead to this premium membership right here, click on that, get signed up, and what that's going to allow you to do is to be able to get the key pieces like email address, contact information from this system. So step 1 is to just get started on the Listen Notes system, sign up for that membership so you have access to search this database and get information from it. Step 2, selecting your topics and setting your filters. So you want to get featured on a podcast to expand the reach of your message, but you need to position why you're a valuable expert on certain key topics, and thus are able to educate their audience. If you're going for non-sponsorship podcasts, all of the bookings were like this, we never paid to be on, then you need to think of what topics you're an expert at. For us at Bonjoro, it was things like how to make your customers your marketers, how personal video can help e-commerce companies grow their lifetime value, how personal video can help course creators have bigger launches, why culture matters to business growth, startup stories, SaaS marketing, how business to customer communication is changing in 2020 and beyond. Think about what topics make sense for you and write out a list of these. One of the ways you will find the right podcasts is simply by searching for those topics on Listen Notes and making sure you are under the podcast tab. Next, you want to make sure to set the filters to indicate only podcasts that have published within the last month, so you get active podcasts. This is also where you can filter for English language only podcasts or whatever language that you're looking to be featured on, and narrow by certain categories if you want. I never use category filtering, but it looks like it could weed out some poor fits if your topics are broad or things that could be construed in a non-business context. Use the filters. It'll save you a ton of time. Besides searching by keywords, there's another strategy that has worked well for me, which I call piggybacking. Essentially, I'll search for prominent people who I know are on a lot of podcasts that are closely linked to topics areas I could also talk on. For us, it's people like Pat Flynn, David Meerman Scott, Seth Godin, Amy Porterfield, or Guy Kawasaki. Search by episodes instead of by podcast because you want to see all the episodes they were featured on so you can reach out to those hosts. So step number 1, we got set up on Listen Notes. Now we have access to the database. Step 2 is going to be how to use our filters and kind of what subjects that we're searching for. So one of the things you could do off the bat is you can type in a certain subject like you see right here. You can click on podcasts and it's going to show you any of the podcasts that are associated with that specific subject. So this is a great way to start. If I wanted to get featured by podcasts that were talking about B2B marketing, I have this list. And I can peruse through, I can read some of this preview text and kind of get a quick idea of if these people might be a good fit listed out here. Now, if this is a ranked podcast that is, say, in the top 50%, you'll get this little thing right here that will provide a ranking, top 1%, top 5%. So you can look at that as one of your selection criteria if you want. Now, a couple things that are important is going to be, number 1, to use your filters. So right here, you can see that under filters, you'll be able to select for a bunch of different criteria. The most important ones, from my experience, are going to be language, to make sure you're setting that to be English, or if you're looking at podcasts in other languages, to select for that language. And then probably the most important one, the publication date of the latest episode. I typically set this filter at past month. The reason being is if you click into a podcast and they haven't posted anything for a year or 2 years, it probably means that podcast is no longer active. So it's not going to be valuable for you to send that person a pitch. So turn this filter on, apply filters, and feel free to use any of those language or additional criteria as you want. And you'll basically be able to go through here and see podcasts that have published within that time frame. And as you go through, you can click through all the different pages that you want. You can even export those results into a CSV file if you wanted that for any reason moving forward. Because the way that this cost structure works is you pay by day of use, sometimes exporting to CSV is actually a really good strategy because that's going to allow you to have all those assets that you can work through during the rest of the week. So that's basically how you do a standard kind of topic-based search. Another thing I talk about in this guide, another strategy that I use is what I call piggybacking. So what piggybacking is you find people that are on the podcast circuit that are well-known or influential people that you think share some of the same key interests or are hopping on podcasts in the same areas that you want to talk on. So in our case, it might be something like, let's see, David Meerman Scott. So this is an individual who basically talks a lot about creating fans, and that's a big part of the company I work for, Bonjoro. A big part of our ethos is also around that. So very tightly aligned in terms of the type of subjects we'd speak on. So I can search his name, and then what I would want to do is actually go for episodes because he's actually an author. So he's not running his own podcast, but he gets featured on lots of podcasts. So by searching that just pulled up 465 results of podcasts that this gentleman has been on, and I can click through now and have basically conversations with podcasts, and I have that kind of link in. So those are the two major strategies, is basically to either use piggybacking, so based on people and search under episodes, or to use keywords, terms, subjects that you think you're proficient to speak on, and have that be under that podcast section. Step 3, qualifying the podcast. You have set your filters and are searching for topics or people that feel relevant to your expertise. Now comes the qualifying part. So here's a search result I just clicked into. There are a couple of things you want to check. First, is there an email icon under the name? Most have this, about 90%, but if they don't, then you won't be able to pitch them here. Next, is the email a catch-all email, like info@business.com or support@business.com? If so, you will spend your time curating a message that is unlikely to be seen. So here's what you can do. Go to hunter.io/email verifier, You get 50 free verifications per month. Say I am the host of a podcast from Bonjoro, but the email provided is support@bonjoro.com. First, use their name. So in my case, it would be casey@bonjoro.com. For small businesses, firstname@business.com is usually correct. If that's a real email, it will tell you. If that doesn't work, the most common variants are firstname.lastname@business.com. So in my case, casey.hill@business.com, or first initial plus last name@business.com. chill@business.com in my case. Hunter.io will also show you mentions of that email domain on the web, which can help here. So from this, you should have a good email to use. Next, read the podcast description and look over the podcast episodes. You want to make sure the last episode wasn't released 2 years ago. Filters should have helped you here, but double check. Make sure the podcast host takes guests. Most podcasts do, but some are just a duo that is teaching lessons just them. Make sure from the description and from listening to a minimum of a few minutes of an episode that this podcast is a good fit for your background. So this section is going to be all about how do you qualify once you find a podcast that looks good? How do you make sure before you spend all the time writing out a pitch that it's going to be impactful? So here's how it works. You have your list of podcasts. Let's go ahead and grab one here. So I'll click on the actual podcast itself, the Marketing Book Podcast. And you can see, by the way, here, this is a rank. This is a really highly ranked one. It's basically saying out of 1.8 million podcasts that they have indexed here, this is in one of the 0.5 percentile of popularity in terms of downloads, engagements type thing. So this is a great high quality podcast. So the first thing you want to read, obviously, is just the about. Right? Make sure that this podcast, the subject matter, is something that is going to be something that you can speak on with confidence and that you can contribute to. The next thing you definitely want to check is make sure they have a little email button here. That is going to be how you're going to get a hold of them. So that's really important. Scroll down here, take a look at some of the episodes, right? So I'm not going to, actually walk through this whole process on this explanation video, but click into some of these, make sure that they have guests on. You can see that they do here, right? Because it's by Daryl, by Seth. And if you're using the piggybacking strategy, you kind of know that they have guests on because of the nature of how you found it. But regardless, make sure they have that email button. Make sure that they accept guests. Make sure that you can speak on the subject. Okay, those are all the first steps. The next thing you're going to want to do is, so under this email button, you click on it. It's going to basically pop up. In this case, for me, it's going to bring up my email client. I see it's office@artillerymarketing.com. So you typically don't want to send these catch-alls, support at, info at, anything that is just kind of a general non-named address. So what I would do here is I would go back and I would look at the name of the host. So in this case, it's Douglas. And then I would pull up hunter.io, which is this software right here. And I would basically type in, let me just paste that. Sorry, guys. Make sure we get it right. So I'm going to grab this. I'm going to paste it over, but instead of office, I'm going to try his first name. Now, this won't always work, but in this case, it does, right? So it checks out. If all of these are green, valid, it means it's good. And they'll actually show you that person's email if it's mentioned online as well. So I can see there's 20 instances of this email being mentioned. So that's great. If I had typed something in and it didn't fit, like let's say that instead I just had written like Doug, right? I tried to verify it. Doug is not a valid, right? The format on the back end is correct, but there's no one who actually lives there. But what we can do is we can see other addresses on that domain. So I can click see results. And that will then pull up a list of those results. So it looks like I've reached my max here, but it will show you a list of results there. So then I could have seen Douglas or other publicly listed messages at that point in time. So that's a great way that you can essentially validate and make sure that you can check if these emails are good. And just so you know, you get 50 of those verifications per month. So on the free plan, which is what I use. So it looks like I just ran into it on that very last query. So use that, justify the email, make sure that you're sending to a named address, and make sure the podcast is a good fit. Step 4, the pitch. Now for the important part, the pitch. Here's an example of one that landed us a top 1% podcast. First, have a good subject line. I always use the same format. Possible podcast guest dash name of the podcast. Then the paragraph is broken down into as follows. The hook. I love the podcast. I found out about the cast from your former guest, David Meerman Scott, who very much shares our ethos around the value of connection. The important part here is to capture their attention. This is also where I often will discuss an episode I watched of theirs. You guys hooked me on episode 47 with that Facebook hack that Michael taught. I still use that to this day. The body. I work for Bonjoro, a personal video email platform that has gone from 0 to 40,000 users in just 3 years since our launch in 2017. Our mission is to help businesses build robust relationships with customers through better customer experiences. At a core level, it's about helping brands succeed in the long term through building relationships and creating a word-of-mouth flywheel. Describe exactly who you are and why it matters. Be concise, but some keys that I have found here are include a statement that shows why you matter. I found when I added that we have gone from 0 to 40,000 users in 3 years, much more interest was piqued than when I initially just described who we were in the early days. And something related to the mission of what your team is about. This section will often be the same between similar pitches, whereas the hook and conclusion you'll typically edit after each pitch. The conclusion. If you think topics around personal video and consumer to business communication or actionable next steps around how to use personalization to make your brand stand out or how to make your customers your marketers sounds interesting, I would love to connect you with our CEO. Let me know. This section is where you have your ask. Note what topics you could talk on, and it is preferable that you are booking for a founder, CEO, or C-class executive. The vast majority of prominent podcasts only are looking to talk with guests at that level. Finally, make sure you're sending not only from a company email, but from someone with a decent title. Podcast hosts don't like booking agencies, so avoid freemium addresses. When I switched my title from Casey Hill-Marketing to Casey Hill, Head of Growth, my response rates went way up. And to be fair, I am the head of growth. I had just been lazy with my original title. This is my current signature I use. For the sake of speed, I often will keep the body text the same between similar pitches, but modify the hook and conclusion. So this is one of the most important parts of this course, which is really having an effective pitch. Now for this, just for the sensitivity and privacy of the people that I'm actually connected with, I'm gonna actually record screen on the course page itself and just kind of walk you through the methodology here. So the first bit, if we kind of scroll down here for the pitch, is going to be the subject line. I've played with a couple things. I've tried different approaches. Honestly, at this stage, both for kind of, I think, simplicity of mind, but just from what I've found effective too from an organizational standpoint, possible podcast guest dash name of the podcast, I think works pretty well. In the past, I used to have it just be possible podcast guest, and that was a disaster for trying to go back and find people to follow up with and all sorts of other stuff. So definitely make sure you have some easily identifiable kind of like nomenclature that you're using, so it's easy for you to look back. So I kind of break this down into a couple sections. And the way that I do it, because I'll typically try to send pitches to a related topic at once. So say I'm trying to target e-commerce or I'm trying to target some specific area. I'll maybe do those 20 to 50 pitches all together at the same time. And so what I'll do is I'll set up a template, and the body that you read here will be pretty similar, but the hook and the conclusion will change each time depending on the podcast. So the hook is kind of how you're going to draw their attention. So if I'm using the piggybacking methodology, I'll often mention the kind of connection point of someone else who's similar in industry, like I did with David Meerman Scott in this example right here. Another thing that I really commonly do is just mention something about an episode that I watched, right? Or even just a clip of an episode that I watched. But it gives me some segue in that shows this isn't just like some mass message, that I did a little bit of my homework. That's definitely going to help your chances of getting actually featured. So you put in your hook. The body, I think, is your opportunity to explain who the heck are you? Why do you matter? This is actually the section that I think I've modified and adapted the most over time. I think it's really important to have some authority statement here. Why should they care about you? Why are you impressive, right? provide some of that information, both from, like you see here, I talked about our users, 0 to 40,000 users in just 3 years, but I also had a little bit of a mission statement of here's why we're doing something that's important. Here's why we're doing something that matters, especially for these larger podcasts. They want to chat with people who are going to be able to provide their audiences with something really unique and intriguing and interesting. It isn't just some regurgitated thing. You definitely don't want a product pitch, right? So this is your opportunity to kind of establish your authority and why you matter. And then your conclusion is just kind of how you wrap up. What is your ask, right? This is really your ask period. So in our case, I'm trying to get them booked in with our CEO, and I'm saying, here's the topics I think we could speak about really well for your audience. I'd love to make that introduction. I keep it pretty concise. You'll see that this entire message, if you go over and read the email, it's not super long, right? I don't think you want to write them a novel. In the beginning days, I used to, include, here's all of our use case links, and here's all, I tried to do all that authority. And I think it just gets lost in the noise. They don't read it. They get this huge email, and it's just like, whoa, this seems like some weird pitch, or, that you want to make sure that content that you send out kind of passes the skim test, if you will. So that's what we're looking at here. The other thing that's important too, which is kind of funny, but it's just your signature, right? So when I first started sending, it just said marketing, right? It said, hey, Casey's part of the marketing department. And that did way worse than when I changed it to head of growth. So give some thought to what your title is and have maybe a nice streamlined signature, maybe with a picture of you, company logo, something that looks kind of professional. That's going to do better. These people get hit up all the time by podcast booking agencies that are sending from like outside emails, either the podcast booking agency's email or sometimes freemium addresses. And that I can guarantee you will not do well. So make sure that you're sending from a company email address, and make sure that you both have the authority yourself, right? So it was like head of growth for me. And also, I strongly recommend that you try to pitch someone in a senior position, a CEO or some sort of C-class executive, when you're actually trying to get a guest on the show. I think that also is really significant. Step 5, co-promotion. You always want to ask yourself, what's in it for the podcast host? You want exposure to their listener base and community, but they want the proliferation and spread of the podcast to new eyes. Here are all the things I recommend you mentioning you will do if the podcast is interested. Reshare to your social channels. Send as part of a newsletter email to your list. If you have an affiliation program, send them a link to join. Offer to toss a few ad dollars behind promoting the episode. Leave a review for the show on iTunes. That last one is something I have done often, and podcast hosts are always incredibly grateful. You can also reshare on Zest.is, which will give your podcast extra clicks for free. Zest is basically a curated quality list of B2B marketing /SaaS articles. So if your topics fit within that, anytime you do a podcast, you can just reshare to Zest with your browser extension and soak up extra clicks. Note that Zest only accepts about 20% of submissions, so it's not a lock that you'll get featured. At the end of the day, remember that growing your podcast footprint is about relationships. These podcast hosts can introduce you to other podcast hosts. You want them to be blown away by how invested you are in helping and promoting, and for you to have that reputation as a brand to work with. This is the final section, but it's a super important one. And this is kind of the co-promotion. It's a little bit of the what are you bringing to the table in this partnership, right? And I think you really want to think of podcasting and reaching out and getting featured on podcasts as a relationship. It's something that if you do it well is going to create an amazing kind of word of mouth flywheel for you, where other hosts are going to recommend you, they can introduce you to people. It opens a ton of doors. But in order to build that kind of you need to show your commitment to getting them downloads and attention on their episodes. Podcast hosts, they want people watching their content, right? So here's some of the ways that you can kind of contribute. Number one, make sure you commit to repost it on their channels. Sometimes people even repost it several times. I think it makes a lot of sense. Make sure to tag people, make sure to engage. It's really important for you to push this on your social channels. Number two, make sure to send it as part of your newsletter email into your list. Hey guys, we did this great appearance with so-and-so. It's an awesome way to get your customers watching it, and again, give them more downloads and attention. So definitely social channels and newsletter. Another thing that's great, and everyone might not have this, and if you don't, it's okay. But if you do have an affiliate program, definitely give them that link so that when they do the show and they put that little link in, they can also be benefiting. And you might be thinking in your head, yeah, but what if that's going to cost us now 20% of each sale? But trust me, if you start paying that podcast host, they are going to love you and they're going to be so excited and they're going to be looking at that. And what's going to happen is they're going to promote it more. They're going to talk about it more. They're going to share it more. And the benefit of that will absolutely, without one shred of doubt in my mind, outweigh the cost that you are paying them. So remember the value in investing in that relationship. So I definitely strongly support that. And then just one other methodology that we've done and experimented with before is toss a few ad dollars behind a quick promotion. That could be either on Facebook or we've done it before on Zest, which I'll show you guys right now in a minute. This is a podcast we were on and basically said no one had ever offered that before. And he was really grateful and excited about it. So what is Zest? I just mentioned Zest. So if I click on my browser and I open up a new tab, Zest is actually going to open automatically, right? And so basically what this is it is essentially going to be a spot where you can repurpose and reshare content, right? So this is going to be where essentially anytime you have an appearance, you can reshare it to this network, and it's just going to allow you to get more clicks and more attention on your material so it can get out in front of as many people as possible. So those are some tips. Again, keep it fluid. If you know someone who might be a good fit for that podcast, introduce them. Good for the podcast host, good for the person you're introducing. It's a way that makes you a connector. So thank you guys so much for going through this course. I really hope this helps. It's been a huge game changer for us here at Bonjoro, and I hope all of these different steps create kind of a replicable process that your team can leverage. Bonus step: how to be a great podcast guest. The following is an amalgamation of feedback I have received from hosts I have worked with. The better guest you are, the more introductions to other podcasts and gigs will open up for you. Use good headphones or a headset, wireless or quality corded. Many hosts noted to me that traditional Apple headphones often scrape against clothes and make noise. Find a quality spot where you won't be interrupted. Find a quiet spot, mute anything that makes noise, phone, tabs on computer, etc. Watch at least one full episode. If a host agrees to have you on, make sure you understand the flow, cadence, and tone that the podcast takes. Watch at least one episode all the way through. Write down a listener persona. You are on this podcast to add value to their audience. You are not on this podcast to just sell your product. Make sure you have a solid sense of their listeners. If you're unsure, then ask, so you can tailor your messaging to be as relevant as possible to them. Have notes to prep. Your job is to talk about an issue as a subject expert and distill concise and actionable ideas. Although every podcast flow is different, going into the show with some ideas of what you're going to build on is always a smart idea. Be high energy. Be excited to be there. Don't talk in a monotone. This is an opportunity for you to give knowledge and perspective on issues that matter deeply to their listeners. Show genuine gratitude and energy during that opportunity. Be conversational. Although you want to have notes as discussed above, don't be rigid. Hosts like to be able to have some back and forth and dig into a subject. Have a bio ready. Your podcast host is either going to ask for your bio in advance so they can introduce you, or ask you on the podcast itself. Have one written up that you can modify as needed for different podcasts. Send them a post-show gift. At Bonjoro, I know we often send little gifts to hosts afterwards, like a bear suit for their kids or a book that was discussed on the show. Hosts are very grateful for these small gestures. Give them guest recommendations post-show. Podcast hosts want great, high-quality guests for their show. If you know someone who's a perfect fit, make a warm introduction. Just make sure to check with the host first to affirm it's a good fit. Hopefully this lesson gave you a finite plan of attack on how you can get onto more podcasts and expand your brand reach. Now, I want you to organize a table where you list out the podcasts that you want to be connected with. And as you reach out, note which ones are pending, which ones ask you to circle back later, and this will be part of your ongoing strategy in the months ahead.